Hello people of the earth and welcome to QuickSave TV. My name is Mike and today we're going to take a look at all the primary skills of the Barbarian. We're talking about Bash, Cleave and Frenzy. I've been meaning to do this video for a while now, and of course first reason why I didn't do that because I didn't have a max level Barbarian and I wasn't confident about the quality of the tutorial I would provide. But now that I have over 90 hours of gameplay with Barbarian behind my back in my pocket, right, I feel much more confident, and I hope to provide a quality tutorial right now. So anyway, now let's start. We have 3 skills in primary as a Barbarian. That's Bash, Cleave and Frenzy. Each of them have 5 skill runes. Of course, we're not going to take a look at you're always suggested to take a rune, one or the other. They will empower you in some way, so you always should have a rune. Now anyway, let's just start with Bash. Bash as such is a very powerful brutal attack against one opponent. So description states, brutally smash an enemy for 150% weapon damage with a 20% chance to knock back, which means in every 5 hits you will have a chance to knock enemy back, to a reasonable distance, which will help you. For instance, if you knock back a powerful melee enemy, you will avoid this one additional attack, okay? And the impressive 150% damage on one target is of course very much impressive. Plus 6 fury per attack, which is more than solid. It's, when we talk about the solo fury generation, Bash outruns all of them, right? Cleave, Frenzy, Bash is the best in this when we talk without skill runes. Now let's start with the Clobber. Clobber as such it changes the knockback to a 35% chance to stun the target for 1.5 seconds. This is quite a powerful ability because 35% chance to stun the target is a lot. Even though Bash is not the fastest hitting ability, 35% is huge chance. It's 1 in 3 hits to stun the target for 1.5 seconds. And knockback as such does not forces you to pursue the target, whereas the stun, it just keeps the target there and allows you to deal some additional hits, in this case 1 or even 2 hits on the target, while the target cannot retaliate. Next, Onslaught. Add 2 reverberations that cause 22% weapon damage per strike. It removes the chance for knockback. So instead of knockback, now you will have 2 reverberations for total 44% damage, which in essence increases your damage output for 194%. This is quite effective, and especially it sounds funny when you attack the enemy. It sounds like drums. So you're like it's the best way I can put it. Now, in essence, it just adds additional damage instead of having a knockback. Punish increases the damage of your skills by 6% for 5 seconds after using Bash. This effect stacks up to 3 times. Now, this is probably one of my favorite abilities for Bash, because if you get to the top effect of Punish, which is going to be 18% for 5 seconds, it will allow you to dish out your, for instance, AoE or very powerful attacks while you get this additional 18% of damage. And 18% of damage is a lot. Is very much. It's almost 20% of damage for 5 seconds to use your powerful abilities, because Bash as such is a single target powerful attack which is absolutely inefficient against many enemies at the same time. Now, Punish allows you to punish those enemies when there's a lot of them, and the damage proportionally will rise as well. This is very powerful abilities. I totally recommend it to you. And of course it's for all the skills, okay, including Bash itself. So the only attack that will not be affected by Punish is the basic attack with the weapon, which no one uses anyway. Instigation generates 6 additional fury per attack. Insane, 12 fury per attack. Almost its second best in fury generation in primary skills for Barbarian. First best is Cleave. I'm gonna show you why. Now 12 fury per attack is again very solid solution, but it will just speed up your activation of your powerful abilities. But because Bash itself is solid, you have 150% weapon damage and 20% chance to knock back, it's not so bad to have additional fury generation per attack. And 12 fury per strike is a lot, considering that your base total without any upgrades is 100. Pulverize causes a shockwave that inflicts 38% weapon damage to enemies in a 26-yard line behind the targeted enemy. Now, Pulverize is slightly less damaging than Onslaught. However, Pulverize can hit many enemies at the same time. 26 yards is quite a lot. It's on the screen, it would be like 15-20 centimeters, maybe a little bit lower. Yeah, maybe a little bit lower, but yeah, in essence, it's if there's a lot of enemies bunch up together and they stay one behind another, this attack will pulverize all of them and will deal tremendous amount of damage because of that. And you after each hit you have this pulverizing shockwave, very powerful, especially if you fight in close spaces, such as, for example, a best example is Act 3. When you descend through the fortress, that's the best example. This is very powerful ability for these situations because enemies that just tend to bunch up together, and yeah, generally when they stay one behind another, this ability allows you to dish so much damage with Bash that in essence Bash in this case becomes a AoE ability with a direct heavy hitting damage. Cool, let's go to Cleave. Cleave as such is a swing. Okay, let me read the description. Generates 5 fury per attack. It's a swing with your weapon in a wide arc to deal 120% damage to all enemies caught in a swing. Now, if we compare Cleave to Bash, Cleave already losing to Bash, right? When we attack single target, but if we attack 2 targets, Cleave already deals twice as much damage, which outruns Bash easily. So Cleave is as effective as many enemies you attack. The more enemies you attack, the more percentage of your weapon damage you've dealt. So if you attack 3 enemies, you deal 360% damage. If you attack 10 enemies, you deal 1200% damage, which is insane. So you have to try to align yourself next to the enemies in a manner that you will hit as many of them as you can. Because Cleave is just like Bash, it's not very fast hitting ability, it's just normal attack speed. But if the more enemies you hit at the same time, the more effect you're gonna get. Next, Rupture. Next, let's go to runes. Rupture. Enemies slain by Cleave explode, causing 85% weapon damage to all other enemies within 8 yards. Now, this ability is very powerful, but don't get fooled by it. It will deal this 85% weapon damage for killing the enemy, not damaging the enemy, so be careful. 8 yards is a reasonable distance for such explosion, but this ability, this Rupture rune, will be particularly effective only against crowds of very small and very weak enemies. It's not going to be as effective against several strong enemies because additional 85% weapon damage in such a small radius, it's not going to be very useful. So you have to remember, you have to keep in mind that this will be particularly effective against very weak and countless enemies. Reaping Swing. Generate 3 additional fury per enemy hit. Now, this is Deceiving rune, okay? Where we have a Bash, which we have the Instigation rune, which gives additional 6 fury generated per attack, which gives a total of 12. With Cleave, Reaping Swing can give you much more depending on the amount of enemies you hit. In order to catch up with Bash, you have to hit at least 3 enemies. This way you already catch up and you outrun Bash. Now, you're not going to always hit 3 enemies, you have to remember that. So minimal possible bonus will be 8 fury per attack, and maximum will go as much as you can hit. You can generally hit with Cleave easily 3 to 5 enemies. In some particular circumstances, when you're really lucky, you can hit like 8, 10, but it doesn't happen often. So you can count on like 2 to 5 enemies. So, in majority of circumstances, it will outrun Bash in this. Scattering Blast is, on critical hits, knock enemies back 9 yards and inflict 60% weapon damage to enemies where they land. Now, this ability is very similar to Pulverize from Bash. Pulverizing with Bash hits the targets behind, your main target, but does not necessarily knock back the enemy back. Whereas Scattering Blast throws the enemy back into the crowd and forces him to deal, 60% weapon damage to all the enemies around it. Plus, you have to remember, if you hit several enemies at the same time and it was a critical hit, you're gonna knock back all of them and they will deal this damage to the enemies in the crowd. Very powerful ability. Broad Sweep increases damage to 156% weapon damage. Now, this damage boost in essence helps you catch up with Bash, because Bash has 150% damage, whereas Cleave has 120% weapon damage, base weapon damage. Broad Sweep allows you to catch up with Bash, and you will no longer feel not confident in fights against one enemy. And again, it means proportionately higher damage against more and more enemies, so it's quite worthwhile. Gathering Storm is enemies cleaved have their movement speed reduced to 80% for 1 second. This is probably one of the most least described and very, very useful, yeah, I would say fundamental to some builds, rune. Now, Cleave, any kind of melee attack with a Barbarian, relies on the fact that the enemy will stay in front of you, okay? There are several ways to keep the enemy in front of you. You can stun the enemy, you can snare the enemy, you can slow the enemy down, you can just tie him to the ground, and whatever of this will help you to keep dealing damage. Especially it is effective, especially it's useful when you play as a Barbarian. When you play as a Wizard, as a Witch Doctor, as a Demon Hunter, these things are not as important. Because generally they can catch the enemy from afar, whereas as a Barbarian or a Monk, you have to stay in front of the enemy to keep dealing the damage. Now, this rune will allow you to keep the enemy really close for you by not allowing him to escape. This will be instrumental and very useful when fighting against treasure goblins, when fighting against very strong enemies, mages, which try to run away and kite you, and any kind of enemy that tries to kite you or run away from you. Very, very powerful, very, very useful. That's probably my favorite ability for Cleave, just because it allows me to replace abilities such as Charge or Leap to something more useful for me, for my build. So I don't have to rely on mobility anymore. I become a whirling, twirling machine of death, because if I catch you, you cannot run away. But keep in mind that the slowdown will be only for 1 second. So this ability, this rune, will not be as effective for two-handers, just because they are slower when it comes to attacking. You have to have something that attacks relatively quickly, that attacks in under 1 second, which, to make it really effective. Well, fast two-hander will make the difference, but, you have to be careful. Next, Frenzy. Okay, let me just, let me just describe you the ability itself. This is my favorite primary Fury generator, but it has several minuses. I'm going to talk about them in just a moment. It generates 3 Fury per attack, which is smallest out of its brothers. Swing for 110% weapon damage. Frenzy attack speed increases by 15% with each swing. This effect can stack up 5 times for a total of 75% attack speed. Now, Frenzy as such is a very, very powerful single target damage dealing ability, but it lacks severely when it comes to Fury generation and AoE damage dealing. Just as, like in case of, well, it just lacks in Fury generation, let's put it this way. With specific runes, you will be able to overcome other difficulties. Now, although the base damage for Frenzy is much lower than Bash, and even a little lower than Cleave's, it's just 110% damage, quickly as you enter the combat, in just 5 strikes, you will not only outrun all of them, you will deal damage with such a speed that you will not be able to actually follow the attacks of your Barbarian. 15% per strike is a lot of difference. It makes a hell of a lot of difference. And 75% total will make a world of difference and bring a world of pain on top of your opponent's heads. Now, there are several runes that can complement that, and I will explain why. Now, let's go ahead to Sidearm. Generally, because majority of the runes for Frenzy, majority of the cool runes, they have a percentage to be activated. But because your attack speed gets very quickly to 75% faster, this chance will occur much more often than with other attacks. When, for example, with Bash, you have 35% chance of activation, and you attack like bam, 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 it's kind of slow. With Frenzy, the same 20%, for example, will activate much more often because you attack like bam, 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 bam. Well, yeah, if I would be good in music, it would sound much better. So let's start with Sidearm. Each strike has 25% chance to throw a piercing axe at nearby enemy that deals 110% weapon damage to all enemies in its path. Now, this is a kind of AoE ability for Frenzy to compensate for its weakness against crowds. And because it's once in every 4 strikes, and because you attack so quickly with Frenzy generally, you will be able to throw this axe very often. Now, this axe deals the same damage as your simple attack with Frenzy, and deals the damage to all the enemies in its path. It generally always searches the first enemy, and just goes in a straight line. Very, very effective ability to dish out additional damage. You should consider it. Triumph. Killing an enemy with Frenzy heals you for 8% of your maximum life over 6 seconds. Good addition, but it's deceiving. Generally, when you use Frenzy, it's not a difficulty to kill one enemy, and you kill them quickly just because you have this great attack speed. The problem with Triumph is this heal lasts over 6 seconds, and it does not stack. Now, because you kill enemies generally much faster than under 6 seconds, you lose this additional heal. Generally, Triumph gives you a heal of slightly over 1% over a second, okay, which is good, but it's not tremendously good as some other abilities, so you have to be wary of that. It's good, but it's not outrageously good, and it certainly is not disbalanced just because it doesn't stack. Next, Vanguard. While under the effects of Frenzy, you gain 15% increased movement speed. Now this is very interesting ability, which is a counter. How to put it? You, as I said, in order to keep the enemies in front of you, you might want to snare or stun them, or you might also want to increase your movement speed, which I never mentioned. Now, with Vanguard, you will get additional 15% movement speed, which will help you to relocate yourself on the battlefield very quickly. I use this ability a lot, but in essence, when you fight in PvE, it does not increase your combat efficiency, not so much. It allows you to survive easier, it allows you to speedrun easier, but it doesn't really give you this tactical boost, you know. Whereas I envision this ability, this rune in PvP, to be very useful just because additional 15% movement speed will allow you to quickly catch up with different enemies in PvP and will be fundamentally useful, but not so much in PvE in my opinion. Of course you could find its uses, and depending on your build, it will be really useful. Next, Smite. Add a 20% chance to call down a bolt of lightning from above, stunning your target for 1.5 seconds. This is my favorite ability, my favorite rune for Frenzy, because of the rate at which you attack the enemy, the tempo. This ability occurs quite often, and it's essentially once in 5 times. It stuns the target for 1.5 seconds. It's easy to identify, and whenever I see that, I understand that I have additional 3 free attacks because of the attack rate of my dual-wield Barbarian. It's unbelievably cool, very powerful, and allows you to perma-stun an enemy in some circumstances. On lower difficulties than Hell and Inferno, you would easily perma-stun a boss and just... that's for instance how I killed one of the bosses. I just got into there and I perma-stunned him until I killed him, okay, without even paying attention to any of his adds, which is... it's just very good, it's just that good. And because you would say, oh, in Bash, Mike, in Bash, the Clobber allows you to stun 35% of the time. Yes, you are correct, much higher chance, twice as high actually, but Bash is not as quick as Frenzy. And in case of Bash, this stun will allow you to hit the enemy maximum 2 times, whereas with Frenzy you can easily get 3 times attack, or even 4 times, depends on your speed of your attacking. And then last but not least is the Maniac. Each Frenzy effect also increases your damage by 4%. Now, remember what I said about Bash? The Punish rune? This is the same logic. For, each Frenzy effect also increases your damage by 4% for 5 seconds. So, in essence, in total, you will have 75% boost in attack speed and 20% damage boost, which is unbelievably powerful. If you look for a outright incredible damage, look no further, okay? Nothing will catch up with that, because the Sidearm is kind of random, whereas Maniac is stable increase in damage, and you will be able to use it in order to boost your other damage and skills anyway. So you're not forced to use anything at all. You will be effective with anything, and it's a universal boost in damage, unlike the chance for a Sidearm or whatever. But the bad side is that it does not provide you any holding abilities on the enemies. Okay, now in short, to summarize, Bash is a very powerful, the most fury generating attack after Cleave, when you're lucky with Cleave. It deals the most damage for a single target, if we do not consider the boost for Frenzy. It's just overall a good, solid ability to hit one target, allows it to generate fury, has a lot of runes to customize it, and they work very well generally. Cleave is the ability that generates the most fury under specific circumstances. It does tremendous damage over masses, and you have to, as a player, you have to know tactically the battlefield in order to use it the most, otherwise you're gonna fail. And the Frenzy is the most effective against single target and the least effective against several targets, most damaging and the least fury generating, and does not have the rune to compensate the fury generation, which is kind of sad, but I use it nonetheless. I like it a lot. It's very effective. I use it with Smite. Now, if you want my personal biased recommendations, I recommend with Bash, I recommend to use Punish. With Cleave, I recommend to use Gathering Storm or Broad Sweep. And with Frenzy, I recommend to use Smite or Maniac. Okay, so that would be it. That was the first in a series. I hope it didn't suck. It's a lot of information, I do understand, but if you want to get good in this game, get used to it. You have to know all these things. Have fun with your builds. I hope it was enjoyable and insightful. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to my channel in order to support my work and get notified when new content becomes available. It was a great pleasure giving you this commentary, this tutorial. Stay tuned for more content and have a great day. Vitality, intelligence, and strength, let's say, right? And you equip and you're like, oh, what is this stupid shit? But when you go to PvP, you realize, wow, that was actually very useful and important. The only person in Greece who has this shirt, nobody else does, and I feel really, really big time nerd.